So hello, everyone. My name is Aaliyah Reich, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm the program manager for conferences and events at CLEAR and DLF. It's my pleasure to welcome you today to the 2022 Creating Accessible Presentations webinar. A few quick logistics before we get going. Today's meeting is being recorded and will be made publicly available in the coming weeks. We expect today's presentation and Q&A to last up to 90 minutes or so, depending on how many questions folks have. You may notice that we've enabled live transcription, so feel free to check on that if you need it. If you're having tech problems, please send a DM to me, Aaliyah Reich, Jennifer Ferretti, or Gail Schechter. When it comes time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, please put your questions in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and ask a question, please raise your hand and wait to be called on. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Debbie Kramer is the Diversity and Inclusion Research Librarian at the Catherwood Library at Cornell University. Debbie serves on the admin team for DLF's Committee for Equity and Inclusion, or CEI, and is the liaison and facilitator for the Inclusivity at the Forum subgroup of the CEI, which also works with the Forum's Community Committee. CLEAR is very grateful to Debbie and to these groups for their work to make today's webinar possible. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Debbie.
Hi, hello everybody. I just wanted to say that I prefer that you not use gender pronouns when you refer to me. Just kind of start us off here. And today I'm presenting this on behalf of the Council on Library and Information Resources, or CLIR, or CLEAR, Digital Library Federation, or DLF, Committee on Equity Inclusion, or CEI, subgroup for inclusivity at the DLF Forum, and we're going to be talking about creating accessible in-person presentations. There we go. All right. So I am speaking to you from the land, the unceded and traditional lands of the Oneida, or the people of the Upright Stone, or the Oneida Nation. I want to be clear that during this presentation, I'm going to be using the terms disabled or non-disabled, as well as a lot of identity-first language. I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of different ways that we can talk about disability and the ways that we can describe disability, and especially when it comes to issues between using person first language, like person with a disability, versus identity first or disabled person. It's really important to acknowledge that society plays a heavy role in disabling people, while also you want to avoid the implication that having a disability is inherently negative. So there's always going to be some sort of tension there, and I want to be clear about what kind of language I'm going to be using. It is really important, of course, to always listen to disabled people to know what kind of language that they personally prefer. I also want to point out I do have a visual disability, so I'm not necessarily going to see anything you put into the chat, or if you put up like the little raise hand and stuff. That's what I got my CLEAR team for. They're going to be helping us out there. If there is a question and it's like, oh, go back to that slide, I needed to get something or something like that, please feel free to put it into the chat. They can interrupt me, but otherwise, you know, you can put in your questions as we go. They'll be answered towards the end. I also want to take a short moment of just reminding everybody who is here live, as well as anybody who might be watching this in the future, because this is being recorded, to adhere to the DLF Code of Conduct when interacting with this presentation and asking questions or anything dealing with CLEAR events. So a little bit more paperwork out of the way. So these guidelines, these were originally put together in 2016 and 2017 by the team of Eleanor Dixon Cole, Chelsea Juliet Rowell, Yasmin El Shorish, and Carly Spina. In 2020, we had a new team that updated those and created a new webinar, which consisted of me, Debbie Kramer, Lydia Tang, Sarah Goldstein, Stephanie Rosen, Alex Wormer-Colin, and Amy Vecchione. And our 2022 guidelines team came in again to update this. What our group was Natalie Bond, me again, Carrie Perman, and Adele Fitzgerald. So we're not going to be able to get to probably everything, especially as you're probably just beginning to think about your presentation and not necessarily working on it right now. As we're recording this is still July, so you've got a bit of time. So if you do have questions coming up in the future, you can send them to forum@diglib.org or forum@diglib.org. And all of the materials that I'm going to be using, they're not quite up there yet, but they will be, including the video of this will also be linked to it. All of this will be on the DLF wiki. And you can use the short URL of https://tinyurl.com/creating2022 or tinyurl.com/CREATING 2022. Woo. All right. So the purpose of our particular presentation today is just kind of give you an overview, some concrete examples about how to make your slides and your presentation a bit more accessible. I won't say you're going to walk out of this being 100% accessible, because accessibility is always a process and different individuals require different levels of accessibility. So you're trying to make this as accessible as you can for the greatest number of people. I'm going to be focusing mostly on PowerPoint, but I will also be talking about Google Slides. I'm going to cover basically some good practices with presentation, but it's really supposed to be focused on accessibility. And one final note, and this is something that I always run across, no matter how many years I do accessibility advocacy. Accessible does not have to equal boring. You will notice that I tend to go for very simple, very basic slides. That's simply because it works best for me. And frankly, I'm designing these to be as accessible as I can be. So these are very kind of low level stuff, but it doesn't mean it has to be boring. You can be creative and you can be exciting, you can be interactive in your presentations and still be accessible. But part of that comes from the skills of accessibility and designing and public speaking. All of these are like this great big web of really complex skills that you have to know. And so try to think of these as like, this is, 10 simple rules for making your presentation more accessible or something like that. This is something to help you along, but you're going to get something wrong, and that's okay. And if you're feeling like, this isn't working for you, that's okay as well. You want to try hard, but you need to be forgiving yourself. Perfection, Perfection is the enemy of good enough. If you're going to keep trying for that perfect presentation, you're never, ever going to get there. And some of these skills, just by watching a TED Talk, you're not going to know exactly how to talk for a presentation. So don't worry about it. It's a conference. We're here to get your information, not to judge how you're presenting. So hopefully this is going to make this a little bit more, relaxed and groovy for you. So I'm going to go into delivering presentations. These are some very kind of basic information and good practices that do and do not have to deal with accessibility. Number one, use the microphone. So you might notice that I'm wearing a headset and I have a little mic here, which is really great for me because I tend to throw my head around and all this when I'm talking. When you're actually presenting in person, you want to make sure that you have the microphone up close to your mouth and kind of think of it like an extension of your lips almost. You want it close so everybody can hear, but every time you move off, they're going to lose your audio. And so if you're cutting in and out like that, it's going to be really annoying for everybody. It's going to be difficult for a live captioner or for other people to be able to like follow along with what you're saying. So always use the microphone, always keep the microphone in your face. And if somebody asks a question and the room doesn't have an extra microphone for them, or you're at the front of the room and they're in the back of the room and they're like, I have a question. And you're like, yes. And they just say their question. Repeat the question into the microphone so that everybody can hear what's being said. And that way everybody knows what that question is. And also, I mean, I love you all so much, but I don't care if you have the voice of an opera singer, use the microphone, no matter what. All right. So while you're speaking, you want to use a clear and a steady voice. You can try to think of yourself, like you're a news anchor, you're reporting this information to a wide variety of people, and you want to make sure that they can follow along with what you're saying. Or you can think about it as I'm having a coffee conversation with these people and you're just kind of going back and forth. Try to take your time. Don't try to rush. If you're going to be using any acronyms or initialisms, go ahead and read them out loud so that they're very clear to the audience, especially to a live captioner. For example, I might introduce myself and say, I'm a member of ENIACRL. If I just said that, most people here are going to be like, what the heck does that mean? If I say I'm a member of ENIACRL, the Eastern New York chapter of the ACRL, or ENY/ACRL, there I'm getting across how I'm pronouncing the acronym, how it is spelled, and also what it actually means. You also want to kind of do that with your jargon. We all know we're all going to be librarians, but kind of keep in mind that, or technology people, or we might be in museums or galleries or whatever, but sometimes we all have our own jargon that we use. And you don't want your entire presentation being, first you got to splort the borgle, and then you have to bongle your borgle. And everybody's going to be like, okay, again, I have no idea what you're saying. So another really big important thing is try to remember to keep facing the audience. It's really tempting when you're presenting to turn around and show something up on the screen. Try not to like actually look, because part of this, your audience you might have individuals who are relying on the closed captioning or the live captioning that might be going on. They might be using hearing aids or other ways to listen to it, or they might be using the way that your facial expressions as well as the way your lips are moving in order to supplement their understanding of what you're saying. So try to remember, keep facing the audience, keep your mic on there, and keep going. And I know like you're like, if it's attached to my lips, nobody's going to see. It's okay. You'll figure it out. Don't freak out. Now that I said that, you're going to freak out, but try not to. It's also a really good idea. Always have a backup for your script or your speaker notes. Technology is going to go everywhere. So have a copy on your phone, have it on your tablet, have it on paper. Just make sure you're not putting it in front of your face so that people can't actually see what exactly you're doing. So let's really get into designing your presentation. As I did with this particular presentation, it's really good practice to make your slides and materials available ahead of time. This is so that people can print them out, can have them in larger text, can do different things with it, whatever they need in order to be able to fully experience your presentation. Please do not do them as a PDF unless you're like a PDF guru and you're able to make it really accessible. If you made it in PowerPoint, share it as a PowerPoint file. If you made it in Google Slides, share it as Google Slides. This way, there's a lot of things that are built into PowerPoint and Google Slides that work really well with various assistive technologies that help people to be able to read, learn, and interact from your presentation. And also, by having the original files, it's really easy for people to go in and change and make font size bigger, smaller, or do whatever that they need in order to see it, use it. It is really important to use built-in templates, the built-in layouts in whatever styles are available. within PowerPoint or Google Slides for accessibility. The one thing you don't want to do is to put up a blank slide and go through and put in a few text boxes and build your slide yourself. The reason you don't want to do that, and actually I'm going to get out of this mode because I want to show you. So right now you should be looking at my PowerPoint screen, and I have it in the view menu and outline view. So you can see everything that is on my screen is mirrored in this outline view. Designing for your presentation 1 and making bullet point, make materials available ahead of time. By using the templates, anything that gets put into the existing templates, this one just has a title and a major text box. If I actually go through and I'm going to insert a quick text box here, and text box, I put in some text. You'll notice my designing your presentation 1 slide still only has the major bullet points: make materials available ahead of time, use built-in templates, layouts, and styles, and leave space for captions. The text box that I added to the bottom of the page, which says text box, does not appear here. So you want to use those default templates and things so that everything appears in whatever layout, whatever position, whatever way that they're using this. So, so you also want to make sure you're using the bullet points, little spaces, and when you're designing it, you want to make sure that you're leaving some space for captions. And so you'll kind of notice on these slides, if you're a visual person, usually think about like maybe 1/4 of the bottom of the slide. That's going to feel like a lot of space. But the reason you want to keep that empty, you don't want to have your text there, because first off, any kind of text that is going over it, if you're using automatic captioning for your presentation, that's going to cover up part of your text and nobody's going to be able to see it. There's a few other things if you really, really, really want to kind of get creative. This is one of the hard steps that I'm going to get into. Most of this presentation is focused on easy, but I do know that people kind of like to do this. So I'm going to switch to a blank PowerPoint. I'm going to put in a new slide, which is just blank. And if you want to build your own Alphablink templates, you can actually do this pretty easily. If you go into review, oh wait, I apologize, not review, just view. And look for the option of slide master. And what this does is it goes in and it lets you see all the background stuff of all the slides. So what's showing up here is all of the default slide layouts. And I want to build one of my own within the blank one. I can do it right here by going through, and I can build in my text boxes, put them in wherever I want to. And then every time I open up a new blank slide, I'm going to have whatever new design I put into. And you can make multiple versions of your own. I'm not going to get into a lot of that kind of stuff, but you can do a lot of work with this. Another really important part with this is that you can make changes to, once you've already figured out whatever theme or template that you're using. If you want to set things to particular text sizes or you want to change different colors, you can do that here. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I just wanted to kind of introduce that to you. Now I'm going to try to bring up my Google Slides. Oops. Oops, that one go down. All right. Now to go into Google Slides. Part of this advanced bit that I just wanted to show you because it is connected is if you want to make your own slides, if you want to create these or you want to change something that's in here, you can also do that with slide and edit theme. And it'll take you to the exact same page. This one's really great, especially, so some of the themes you might use, so I believe that this is a title theme. So it has a large title and large text that says click to edit theme style. And then beneath it, it has a secondary box that says click to edit theme subtitle style. Click to edit theme subtitle style is showing up in a gray color. Let me see if I can bring that. So Google calls it gray, dark gray 3, I believe. That might be too light. So one of the things you can do is you can come in here and change that so that subtitle is always black. And then once I close out of here, it's going to save that. And then when I put in a new title slide, you'll notice that it's now black instead of gray. It makes the change throughout all of this. So I'm just going to go back into my PowerPoint and let me make sure sorry, I'm looking over my thing. Another thing to keep in mind. Am I still in my master slide? No. Okay. If you're ever stuck in your master slide, just cancel it. There's like close master slide button. So it's always kind of easy to get out of it and play around with that before you do your presentation too. That's always a good time to get into making those kind of changes. So another thing that I wanted to point out is when you're using bullet points, you want to use whatever default versions there are. You can try to get creative and like, all right, so this one's going to be, a cat head. So it's a picture of a cat head and a sentence, and a picture of a cat head and a sentence. While that may look really, really cool, the way that it comes off, and honestly, I have seen this. It wasn't a cat head. I don't remember what it was. But the way this comes off in a screen reader is that it's gonna say image, make materials available ahead of time, image.powerpoint or .ppt or Google Slides, image, not PDF. So that's if you don't have alt text with it. And the person's going to be sitting there. If you do have alt text with it, then it's going to be like cat head, make materials available ahead of time, cat head. So it's going to be really, really strange. So kind of like stick to some of these built-in ones. And again, it allows you to play around with your bullets. You can have open empty circles. You can have small square boxes. You can have check marks, all sorts of stuff. Use the built-in stuff because this is what is going to allow you to make it the most accessible presentation that you have. So I'm going to go back. Here we are. So let's get into a little bit more about designing your presentation. This is slide designing your presentation 2. Another thing you want to do is make sure that the language is set in your PowerPoint. And this one's another pretty easy one to demonstrate. I'm using PowerPoint 365 because that's what's coming with my new position at Cornell. So I'm still trying to figure out where a lot of these things are at. And oops, and again, I turned off my my screen reader. So I'm not flying totally blind. I'm not screen reader dependent. I do have some sight, but I use it to supplement my sight. All right. So you go down to options in here. And you're looking for language. And so by default, it usually has the match Microsoft Windows, especially if you're going to be including different languages in there. You can always move so that whatever your default language is right there at the top. And that ensures when somebody opens this, maybe you're sharing your slides in French, you have multiple versions. They're not going into the French one and then wondering why their screen reader can't understand or can't read or is just completely not working for them. Usually for the text size, you want to go with about 24 to 32 points. I tend to use 28 point text With mine, that works really well. If you're working in Google Slides, you can usually go a little bit smaller than that and go as small as 20 points and still have it be very readable from both the front of the room as well as from the very back. And I already talked about using bullets in built-in style. So let's go on to the next one. So this is something to keep in remember. Again, you want to entertain, you want this to be interesting for people, but you know, there's this thought, there's this thing that I come across, the kind of tension that I run into a lot of the times when I'm talking about accessibility with people. And they're like, well, I need pictures, I need sound, I need movement, I need all of this like multimedia. Otherwise, nobody's going to pay attention to this because it's boring. And again, accessible doesn't have to equal boring, but often simple is often better. If you're, you know, I've had somebody say every single slide has to be different in order to keep people on their toes. Well, that's actually not good. That causes anxiety. And if you don't know what's going to be happening next, and you're like, all right, so this one's going to be, it's going to be a black background with white text. And the next one's going to be blue background with the yellow text. And the next one's going to be rainbow colors and it's changing and dancing around. Like, yeah, it's like, that's really cool. But it's also migraine inducing. You know, it can also be really a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration on the part of your viewers. So you want to communicate your information in ways that your audience can walk away and learn something. You have a limited amount of time and you have a limited amount of space to work with. So try to keep focusing on being simple. You're not here to be an entertainer. You know, you're not getting paid to be a stand-up comedian. Thank goodness I'm not. And but you're here to just give some information. So focus on sharing the information. Another thing is making sure that your text size, when you're having, whether it's 24, 32, 28, whatever area you're going to be within that that range, make sure it's the same on each one, because if somebody is like, oh, I have to squint, and then the next one is huge, you're going to kind of freak them out. So try to think of it, you know, predictable structure. You want it to be able to allow them to focus on what you're talking about. And a lot of those changes and things that can also be really, really cognitively heavy. And so you want to lighten your cognitive load for your audience. You want them to be able to take in the information. They're going to be at DLF, they're going to be at face-to-face, they're going to be going to a bunch of different things. So you want them to be able to just sit down, take in this information and think about it, and then go on to the next one and sit down and take it in. So I'm going to show you an example of a chaotic slide. And I'm also going to try to narrate a little bit what's going on for anybody in the audience who might be visually impaired or blind. So this is a chaotic slide. We don't know what it's going to do. So I'm going to hit the button. So the first bullet point pops up and it kind of spins in from the distance and it says, why is this happening? And then the next one spins in from the distance too, and it's another bullet point and it says, what is going on? Oh, all right. So that one's the title that goes over the bullet points, and that's coming up from the bottom and suddenly jumps up on top of the bullet points. So now my slide says on the left-hand side, where am I? Bullet point, why is this happening? Bullet point, what is going on? All right. So what do you think is going to happen next? You don't have to answer. You don't have to answer. That's all right. I'm going to show you. Bonk, 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 bonk. All right. So now I'm over here, text showing up. It bounced in kind of from the top of the screen, and it's over on the right-hand side now. Oh, okay. Let's see what happens next. It's another bullet point. This one is upside down and in the lower right-hand corner. This one just spins in, coming around from nowhere, and it says, bullet point, what will happen next? All right. All right, we got one more go on in here. What's going to be happening next? Are you feeling the tension of this? Wah, wah. It's the dancing hamster, really pixelated picture of a hamster who's kind of just spinning around in circles and kind of dancing. So while that was like entertaining, and it's kind of fun to be like, oh, hey, there's a dancing hamster. I remember that song, maybe if you're old enough. It's going to be really chaotic. People aren't going to know and they're probably going to be paying so much attention to what's happening. They're not going to listen to any of the text that's going on. So I'm going to take that little dancing hamster off because that can be a little bit much for people. So again, you're here to share information, not necessarily to be entertaining to people. So I'm now up to slide 12, where we're going to be talking about contrast and colors. So when you're putting together your slides, you usually want to work with high contrast colors, which could be a dark text on a light background, like what I'm using. I'm using black text on a white background, or you can even use light text on a dark background. For some people, they find if you're doing this in a virtual platform, having the dark background and light text is easier for people. And doing it the other way around, where it's dark text on a light background for a live audience. I tend to stay away from dark backgrounds simply because of the way my eyes don't work, I guess, to say. So again, I kind of go for this, but you want it to be high contrast. So there is a website that you can go to. This is a fabulous website. This is called Contrast Checker, which is contrastchecker.com, or contrastchecker.com. And this one's just kind of showing exactly what this page is, which is foreground color is black, background color is white, and our contrast ratio is 21:1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get into Contrast Checker so I can show you. So now I'm at the Contrast Checker website. It is showing a sample, has two boxes on the left-hand side. This is foreground and black background. Foreground is your text, background is the background. You can change those. It's just a simple hex code information in it. And it'll tell you what the ratio is. So this one says at the bottom of it, ratio 21. So that's 21:1. Typically, your guidelines, minimum guidelines for contrast are 4.5:1, or if you're using really large text throughout, you can even go as low as 3:1 contrast. And I'm going to scroll down on the page, and you should see a series of 6 circles. Each one of them are green. Each one of them have a check mark in it. Some of them even say pass. So this is basically doing a high contrast checker against various types of accessibility. And this, since they're all green, they're all check marks, it all means that this is fabulous. This is great. This is really high text. There are some colors that can be high contrast and are going to be really, really difficult to read. So I'm going to switch over to a different one. So blue and red is a very terrible combination to use. If you're old enough, you might remember 3D, red and blue. Some of them recede. For some people, they vibrate. It can be really difficult to see. So I'm using a pure red for text, which is the foreground, which is hex code FF0000. And my background is pure blue, which is hex code 0000FF. And it's showing me it's a ratio of 2.15:1. So it's not quite as high contrast as it needs to be. I could probably choose a different kind of colors, but I just wanted to show you this one. It's kind of making me a little nauseous looking at it. But you can see that it fails many different tests. And another thing about contrastchecker.com is that it also offers you a C grayscale option. This is really good for, it's not going to work for all types of color blindness, but it's going to be a really good general test for how good of a contrast it is. And with this one, it's a very, very poor contrast. It looks like a very, very, pale letters against a dark background. It's really, really hard to see. So I'm going to go back to my slide. So I'm going to show you a slide that actually has bad colors, but it passes the contrast check. This is only going to be up for a very short amount of time. If you have color sensitivity, or if you're color sensitive migraines, you may wish to close your eyes for a brief moment. This doesn't affect everybody, but it does affect some people. So I'm going to go to the slide in 3, 2, 1. So this particular slide that is up is using a very dark green text on a very light red background. And it's not too bad for a short amount of time. If you're staring at this right now, and take stock of yourself, are you starting to notice maybe the words are a little bit blurry, maybe things are a little bit off? I'm going to now switch back to the black and white in 3, 2, 1. All right, now we're back to normal color. You might feel now that it's kind of bright. It's a little bit brighter. It takes your eyes a little bit to connect back together. So this slide is showing the test off the contrast checker. The foreground color is hex code 2E4A1E, which is dark green. The background color is hex code FFCCC0, which is a very light red. The contrast ratio is 7.11 to 1. So I'm actually going to get into contrast checker and show you exactly how this page comes up. So this was already preset with the actual colors. When I scroll down, it says it passes everything. This is WCAG AA, AAA for 18 points. The brightness, colors, color difference is great. We try it with the grayscale and you're like, wow, that's actually really great. That's fairly readable. It's kind of dark text over a light background. But this is actually a really horrible color to use because I've tried this with a lot of people. If I leave that up for too long, they start feeling a little anxious. Some people feel sick to their stomach. That red and that green is just a very bad combination. So while it's high contrast, it's actually really ugly. Am I hearing somebody needing to ask a question? No, I thought I heard, okay.
Nope, I don't think so.
All right, I thought I heard something, but that's totally fine. So yeah, so just because your colors are high contrast and they're going to work doesn't mean that it's going to be a good idea. URLs, this is a fun one. So we're recommending everybody to use tinyurl.com or tinyurl.com for your short URLs. This is because you can instead of reading out, wiki.diglib.org / DLF/CEI/ and going through these really, really long URLs, you're going to have a short URL. Makes it much easier to see, makes it much easier to write down quickly. Take out your camera, take a picture. It's also tinyurl allows you to create your own ending for it. So instead of, this thing is going to be blah, 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 wiki.diglib.org or wiki.diglib.org and saying that like over and over again, you're going to be able to say tinyurl.com/creating2022 or tinyurl.com/C REATING 2022. It's much easier, and if everybody uses that for the URLs, everybody's going to know, oh, it's all just tinyurl.com, so I just need to get whatever text you have at the end there. So that's going to make your URLs better. Alt text for images. So whenever you're working with any kind of non-textual content, like images and video, you always want to have some kind of textual alternative. For example, on this particular slide, I have some bullet points onto the left side of the slide. On the right-hand side of the slide, I have a picture of a giraffe. it's important that you not only include the alt text in your slides. So if I'm looking at your slides before or after your presentation, I will be able to know exactly what image you have up, especially if you accidentally forget when you're presenting to explain to people what image is up. And it could be as simple, the alt text for this one is just a giraffe, and is just a picture of a giraffe. The biggest question people have is how much alt text do I include? How much description do I use? A good thing to keep in mind is think about, why are you using this image? What is it? Why is it here? So I put in a picture of a giraffe because I love talking about giraffes. And it's a really good, interesting thing. I don't need to in this context. It's just kind of decorative. So maybe even if I forgot to say there's a picture of a giraffe on this slide, it doesn't actually have a lot to do with the content that I'm trying to get across. It's just an illustrative example. So I don't need to get really depth into it. Think of it as, assume your audience knows what a giraffe is. It is not so important to me. If my audience has no idea what a giraffe is, it doesn't matter, because this could be any picture. This could be a can of soda. This could be anything. So I do not need 2 paragraphs of alt text going, a giraffe is a 4-legged creature, much like a horse with a really long neck and patterns on, and like try to get into it. Like, don't do that. You're trapping somebody into you going on and on and on trying to describe an image. If it's that important, then maybe you need to use a different image. Maybe you need to think of some other way of getting that information across. The absolute worst thing you can do during the presentation, especially if you use all images or you're very image focused, is to, this happens to me every time. Somebody tells like a joke, but the punchline is an image. So they're like, start at the end of the joke. Everybody, it goes silent. And then everybody starts laughing. And then the speaker goes on to the next slide. And I'm sitting here going, okay, what was the punchline? What's happening? Like, tell me what you're talking about. I have absolutely no idea because nobody gave me that information. So always explain to your audience what the image is. Think about how much information. I mean, if this particular picture, like maybe I'm teaching biology, and it's really important that I point out that the giraffe has a very long neck and it has 7 vertebrae bones within it, very similar to a human. And maybe I need to go into that depth, or maybe I need to talk about the particular coloring. This particular giraffe has a darker coloring towards the back, but as it goes down to the legs, it kind of fades off. Whatever is important, why you're using that image, that should be in your alt text. All right. Adding alt text is really easy. I'm just going to, I right mouse click and there's edit alt text in my particular option of PowerPoint. Other versions of PowerPoints, you need to get into the image and then format image, and then it'll have edit alt text. I'm using a slightly newer one. And with Google Slides, it's also incredibly easy. I don't think I put in a picture on here, but again, it's just right click and there's alt text, or the shortcut Control Alt Y. So really nice and snazzy to you. So please always, oops, so please always add alt text, and make sure you're including alt text for your charts too. It's a little more difficult with your charts. So the best thing you can do, especially if like just having a giraffe isn't going to work for you, is you can put it into the speaker notes of the slides, so that when you share the slides, somebody is getting that 2-paragraph description if they want it. You can include a citation for, this is the article that actually has all this data and explains it. Or here's a link to where I have my data, something where it's more clear than just this is a chart. And as you can see, the small triangle is blah, 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 and you're not getting across as much information. For more information to learn how to do these, I do have a link here to, it's a presentations from 2014 called Writing Good Alt Text. It's still really, really good for helping people write alt text. And it's just tinyurl.com/2014 alt text, or tinyurl.com/2014 capital A L T capital T E X T. And so make sure you're including alt text. And if you're going to have videos, make sure they are captioned. If you absolutely can't find videos to use that have captioning with it, at least make sure you're including a descriptive introduction, as well as perhaps even a descriptive outro with it as well. You can also put a transcript of it or an audio description into the speaker notes. Another way that you can get around this is, to think, is it better that I put text on my slide? Is it better that I use a video? Can I use an image or a series of images for this particular one? One of the things that I come across with vendors, especially, is that they have those really cute videos they have up on the website. And it's like, text comes in and it's got that free music in the background and it's a commercial and it's really great. And I hate those when a vendor is presenting, because they will stop talking. They'll play the video and it's like, yeah, I'm getting some really great groovy music here. I'm getting absolutely nothing off of what you're showing. I often ask a friend, could you read that to me or let me know if that's important? So kind of keep that in mind when you're working it. Have captioning as well as alt text. All right, so we're almost to the end now. Do an accessibility check. So if you're using Google Slides, it doesn't have an accessibility checker. You can install add-ons like Grackle Docs, GRACKLE Grackle Doc with an S at the end of it. Or you can even download it as a PowerPoint and run it into your PowerPoint. And I'm going to get out of my presentation mode to show you. You should be able to see across the bottom. I've got this tiny little, it looks like it's a little accessibility dude, the little thing. And then it has a little check mark on it saying yes. And it says accessibility good to go. With the PowerPoint 365, it has the accessibility checker going through the entire time you're doing anything, and it will pop up and it will give you hints on how to fix anything. If you're using an older version of PowerPoint, you usually have to go into the file menu, and then there's an options version here, and then there's another button that you need to press to do the check accessibility. You can look at the old version of this if you want to see how to do that. But do an accessibility check. That's going to grab a lot of those little things, the little problems that you might have missed. All right, so now we have time for questions. And again, for everybody to make sure you have this, email your questions to forum@diglib.org or forum@diglib.org. And all of the guidelines and resources are at tinyurl/creating2022 or tinyurl.com/Creating2022. So now I'm going to stop sharing so you guys can, I have faces back. Hello, everybody. All right, so do I have any questions at this point?
We don't have any just yet, but I feel that there may be some brewing.
Right. We're going to hang out and wait. Everybody's just in here
It was such a fantastic presentation. People are just sitting in awe of it. It really was. They're just sitting in awe. Like, look at all these things that I just learned. Okay, so we do have one question in the chat. And it says, it's from Megan. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I am an archaeologist and often use illustrations of ceramics or skeletons and use animations to highlight a particular element. Is there a better way to do that so that I can highlight multiple things in a row?
That's a really good question. Again, it's going to depend on what kind of images you're using and how well you feel that you're going to be able to explain this to your audience. Oftentimes when you're working with visually impaired or blind individuals, especially in archaeology, museums, or other things, there are often 3D options, either the actual thing. So if you're, for example, using the head of a statue, you might bring the actual head into the classroom. And so as you're showing pictures and talking about it, you would allow the blind student to be able to feel it out and try to match how you're talking about the image and everything to what they feel. You can also make your own 3D printouts of them, especially with archaeology and a lot of things we're going to be working with items. You can use different textures on them. So it's like where you're feeling the rough texture or you're feeling the 2 dots, that is this particular area or that is this particular bone. As well as making sure that you have very clear images to highlight with it. You can also use like swell paper. There's a lot of different things you can do. And also making these things available to all your students. It's probably really helpful for some students to not only see the image up there, but also to be able to touch a model and go, oh yes, yes. So this bone here, that's what that is. And as everybody else is getting it. So this is just another way. And I hope that's kind of helpful for you.
Yeah, there's a follow-up in the chat that says, thanks, I do have a 3D printer, but had never thought of using textures to highlight features. That is an awesome suggestion. I appreciate it. Awesome. There is another question from Jasmine. I noticed one of the template options in PowerPoint shows placeholders for footer content. And I've seen a lot of presenters use this space for branding their institutions or funders or Twitter handles, etc. But it looks like this content would interfere with captions. Do you have recommendations for alternative ways to brand your slides without using that prime real estate? Also, thank you so much for this helpful presentation.
So there's a couple of ways you can think about this. The slides that I shared actually do use a footer. And that footer is slide page numbers because I'm pedantic like that, I guess. But the reason I have those page numbers in there is if I give my scripts or I give the transcript of this to somebody and I give them my slides, they would be able to follow along and match things together. If this is something where like I really want people to be able to see, you know, this is my Twitter, you can just bring it up, like have it be a part of your slide. Of course, obviously the introductory slide, as well as through the rest of your slide. But always keep in mind that if a person is only interacting with your presentation as you're presenting it, unless you present it and not only have it visually, but also textually, as well as audibly, you're not going to reach your entire audience. You're going to be leaving somebody out. So just try to, you know, think of different creative ways to do it. Another thing you can do, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen one more time. And hold on one moment. I'm now sharing my screen. So another thing you can do, I'm just on the very last blank slide, the question slide. I'm just going to click. So I'm not highlighting any boxes. I just want to click the background. So it's just blank. And then I'm going to hit my tab key. And so the very first thing I hit tab and it highlighted the title box that says questions. I hit tab again. It's highlighting the lower box where I have my 2 bullet points within it. I tab it again and it goes down to my footer. So if you make your slides available to people and you put information in the footer that is covered over by the captions, as long as they can go back and check your slides, they're going to be able to get that information. They're going to be able to get it, whether they're using a screen reader or whether they're just looking at the slides themselves.
Great, thanks for that. There's a question that is sort of for the DLF organizers, so for me, but I'm going to read it out loud so everyone can hear it. And also, Debbie, I'll welcome any additional thoughts from you if you have them. The question is from Eleanor, and it says, thank you so much. I really appreciate this very helpful presentation. Perhaps a question for DLF organizers. Debbie advised making our slides available in advance of our session. Should we do this through the OSF, which I think stands for Open Science Framework, repository that DLF has set up? Thank you. And I would say yes, that would be a great way to do it. And then you can link to it when you are presenting in person. You can share, a bit.ly if you want to make that, or you can share the link during your presentation in person.
Tiny URL
or tiny URL. Yeah, we tend to use bit.ly, but I guess we'll move to tiny URL based on what you have suggested. But yeah, in any case, I don't know if you have anything to add to that or any thoughts. Yeah.
The negative part about bit.ly is that it gives you the bit.ly/ and then it's like 3 capital E lowercase c capital F lowercase x 0 1. Like, this is cognitively heavy for people to be taking in. By saying go to tiny URL creating 2020 or 2022. Don't go to the first one, go to the second one. Tiny URL / creating 2022. They're going to be able to remember that so much easier. They're going to be able to write that down, and you're not having to repeat it like 3 times and have your slide up for 5 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. We've actually, I don't know if we have a paid version or not, but we have been, I don't think we do. We have been able to do like custom, I don't know what you call that, but rather than having those random letters and numbers, have a custom, kind of direct link to it. So bit.ly / whatever, something custom. So if that's available in a free way, you could do that. But you could also just link to the OSF repository ahead of time. Did you have any thoughts about that, Debbie, specifically about putting things into OSF? That's what we would recommend, and we'd love for slides to be there and materials to be there ahead of time and after. But yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I've used it for the DLF forum and other presentations and things, and it works pretty well. It's fairly easy to look through when there's multiple items within it and be able to actually get to the content. I won't say it's 100% accessible because nothing is, but I don't run into major things that get in the way of my using a screen reader with it.
That's great to know. Are there any other questions? Folks can raise their hands if you want to come off mute, or if I can't tell, we can give it another minute if any are going to come into the chat. I feel like we need to play the like Jeopardy music or something, right?
I was always taught that you're supposed to wait 18 seconds. And that 18 seconds for you as a presenter feels like an eternity. And it is killer. And you're going to be like, okay, that's done. And that was actually 5 seconds, So yeah, giving that amount of time for people to think, to put together their questions and either go, yes, I want to ask this or not. But obviously, of course, everybody can ask questions and send them to forum@diglib.org or forum@diglib.org.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think then I'm not seeing any other questions come in, and I think the explanation of the 18 seconds probably took 18 seconds. So I feel like we're covered there. So yeah, thank you again to everybody for attending and to anyone who's watching this after the fact. We're super grateful to all of you for being here, and extra grateful to Debbie and all of the folks who contributed to making this presentation. And the recording will be available online after some amount of time relatively soon. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at forum, FORUM, at diglib, diglib.org. So thanks to everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.